Welcome to New Realities. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and this program is about the evolution of consciousness. So I can't think of two better people to talk about the evolution of consciousness than Patricia Albere and Jeff Carreira from Evolutionary Collective, and they have a new book out called Mutual Awakening. Let's talk about where your work is bringing a whole new perspective on consciousness to the people. So, Patricia. Hi, I've known you a long time, right? We go back.
Different iterations, yeah.
We go back in many incarnations in this lifetime, and you've always been about consciousness. You've been giving your life over. So and now you're working with Jeff. So where does this new level of work take you? What's the perspective you're taking on the collective part of evolution?
Right. Well, about 10 years ago, I think simultaneously when Jeff, he'll tell his story, but where he was exploring something very intensely, I came to the end of wanting to work with people individually. So I love people, and I'd spent 35 years, in the transformation of consciousness for human beings. And generally, even if I worked with groups, people work on themselves in a group.
Right. It's about themselves. It's all about me.
It's all about me, and which is good. And obviously, as you know, because we've been there, that so many thousands of people, hopefully millions of people at this point, in 2014, have really opened themselves up and spent time and energy and money and heart in the discovery of a much deeper connection to who they are, into consciousness, into connection. They do yoga. Right. People are coaches. They do retreats. I mean,
meditation. They do all this stuff about themselves, which is
fantastic.
Fine.
I mean, because that, I'm sure Jeff will put a more philosophical, historical spin on it because he's a genius at that. But just from my own observations of being in it for the last 40 years, I felt like 10 years ago I was just kind of like, well, what?
Right.
Where's the new wave, and is there one? And it just felt like it was getting full. Paradigms, which is a certain kind of reality, they begin and they're kind of wide open and there's lots of space and discovery, and then all of a sudden they start filling up with everything.
Right, and then you wonder, where's this going? I've done every workshop. I've done
That's right.
So historically, Jeff,
yes.
because I appreciate that perspective in order to give this a context. We came from the me generation, I'm working on myself too. Trace your development.
Well, okay, let me say a little bit about myself.
Yes.
I was one of those people who became interested in the Eastern notion of enlightenment and started to do a lot of meditation. Met a spiritual teacher, became part of a spiritual community, and I really had the opportunity to really drop out in a fairly significant way and do practice to my heart's content.
Right.
And at some point, the whole community was about the possibility of what you could call an intersubjective or collective awakening, and we were working toward that without knowing really what it was.
It just kind of came upon that community. I mean, I've heard about that.
Yeah, and the teacher's name was Andrew Cohen, and he was really interested in the possibility of enlightenment, which had traditionally been an inner realization of an individual, becoming something that was shared by a collective of individuals. And
that happened in those groups. There was some awareness that transcended the personal, because I experienced some of that. Yes.
And so that's so those kind of breakthroughs occurred, and it took what I had been pursuing as enlightenment to a level beyond what I had imagined possible, and that's what I became devoted to, was that, which is different than something you get for yourself. Right, it's a from me to we.
Let me just throw something out here, because in my interview with Bruce Lipton, who's a brilliant biologist, he talks about the synergy of awareness, that when cells came together, individual cells came together, their collective awareness was much greater than the individual cells. So the individual cells in your body have their own awareness, but when they come together, they create a gestalt that is much greater than anything they could have imagined individually. So is the same thing then happening, you're feeling?
Yeah, can I make one distinction there?
Please,
Because I think often in collective intelligence type work, there's this idea that individuals come together, and by coming together, there's a synergy that happens, and every individual has an awakening to something much bigger than they could have had on their own, which I think is true. But I think in the work that we're doing, what's really interesting is when people come together and something starts to wake up that's actually beyond the individual.
Right. So in the old paradigm, you're saying then that the individual would come to an awareness of something bigger than themselves as the individual part. And you're saying it's not about the individual anymore. It's about what they're sharing.
Right.
Is that?
That's part of it. I mean, for Jeff, just to fill in the rest of the background part, was prior to the 10 years ago when I started going, okay, you know, how do I develop something different with people? Is there a new way to work? Is there a way to come from this emergence? What it was back when you and I now have a similar Paul Lowe,
our good friend.
when he was with Rajneesh.
Yeah,
that was
I didn't know him then.
I knew him then.
Okay.
And I met a beautiful, gorgeous German mystic in that context. And we fell in love and had this extraordinary awakening together. So I had a dual version of what he had, a group version.
Right, so the two of you, it was something bigger than both of you.
Yeah, and it was nonstop. You know, for about 4 years, we were turned towards each other in a particular way that, as we've talked about the evolutionary impulse or the optimizing force of the dynamism of existence or eros or whatever you want to call it, was completely in charge. I mean, we were being taken by something.
People feel, though, I know what you're saying, that they may lose their individuality, but that's not true. Do they gain something?
Yeah.
Right? Would
Totally.
you say? How do you tell people that, though? I mean,
well, let me just finish that and then answer that.
Yeah.
So what happened was 10 years ago, I realized that the power of what I had experienced with him, there was a way we were with each other, and it wasn't just that we were in love and man and woman. You know, there was something bigger than that was occurring. And when I started to work with the groups, you know, a number of years before we found each other, something started to happen, because I thought if two people can come together and it's that explosive and the awakening is that powerful, what if you have 50 people?
right.
I mean, really, you know, if you get the multiple beloveds, not just the two beloveds with the beloved, you know, what kind of power could that?
And did you find that?
Yes, and then finding Jeff, who had this different but, you know, similar passion for this collective awakening that he'd experienced. It was like this perfect match of then bringing more and more people together in a committed way so that we are actually having that experience without people have to living on an ashram or be intense lovers day in and day out.
No, but I think as you're talking about collective awakening, I'm really getting that that's really something new for the planet.
Yeah.
And the realization that we're actually not separate beings. I mean, that's been around, but that we're part of a bigger organism, but that organism is coming awake.
Right. And to go back to the question you asked before, because you just segued into it, people, as you said, this idea can sometimes bring up fears that you will lose your individuality.
Yeah.
And what you do lose is the sense of separation. And for people who are identified with separation as individuality, there's a certain fear that you're going to lose, you know, that separation. Now, and this is a term that I heard from Patricia, which is that, you know, the essence of who you are, which is not about a defined separation, but it's about the fact that each individual has a distinction. That distinction can't go away because it's just part of the fabric.
Each cell has its own function in your body, but it comes together to form a totality.
Right.
So this is a new sort of, that is the new paradigm for the planet. It's about something bigger than all of us. And it seems to be coming online with you guys. I mean, you're initiating and other people too, but I think it could catch on. I think it could become a global phenomena.
I think it has to. I mean, when you look at you know, the time that we're in, which is a different time than 1970 or 1980. You know, this time is with the internet and people in Africa having cell phones, and you know, everybody. If something, you know, if something catastrophic was going to happen to the Earth, like in a moment, Everybody would
We
know.
know about it.
I mean, how amazing. I mean, that's crazy.
Or if something does happen, like in a small town in Connecticut, the whole world
can know.
Yes,
Right.
and does know and
Right.
responds
Right.
emotionally as one organism.
Right, and we didn't
Yeah.
have that connectivity before. So to me, there's the manifestation of that on a physical kind of is a manifestation of what Bruce Lipton was speaking about, and also Teilhard de Chardin talked about creative union, which is that when the cells share characteristic energy, they unite into greater wholes.
Right.
And when you think about human beings, the characteristic energy we're generally sharing is egoic.
Yes.
And egoic energy is made of separation.
Right.
So guess what? That's why we haven't united. So people know about unity consciousness. We know that we're all one. We have that experience. We can have that experience individually and every once in a while with each other. But we're not trained. We're not focused on what are we sharing.
Well,
What's the energy we're sharing?
Yes, I agree, but I think the internet has had a profound neurological impact on people.
Right.
They played with our sense of self, our sense of
Interesting.
unity, and I think this is our last chance for separation. You know,
Right.
if you want to be
Yeah, right.
separate, it's
Hold on.
Yeah, but I think something bigger is already in motion.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess I would say one of the things that's interesting is that, you know, separation likes to make its last stand.
Yes, totally.
That's
And
what's
so what happens is the internet, of course, you read books about it, and people have experiences of unity consciousness, but almost as soon as we have this experience that we're not separate, our habitual sense of self grabs it and turns it into an experience that I had. And it becomes reabsorbed into the individual sense of self. And I think the work that we're doing is about coming together over a period of time and learning to not pull it back.
Into I.
Into
This
me.
is me,
Yeah.
my
Right.
experience,
Right.
look at me. Right. And I think we'll discuss the parameters a little bit, but then we can get into the individual exercises or what you coach people into letting go of the
Yeah.
I, me thing to share something bigger. So it's both I and we together.
Right.
Right.
Is that the idea? It's not like
Yeah.
I'm not going to deny the I-ness of me.
No, it's transcend and include. I mean, and part of it is, and I'd love for you to speak to the developmental piece, is that because, I mean, and I've just been traveling in the, Boulder, San Francisco, the places where the most postmodern, where people have
light
really
centers.
valued,
Yeah.
That's right.
valued, their individual awakening.
well, yeah.
And, I mean, really, in a very strong way. And what I've seen is I've really seen the value of how much individual work we've done. So developmentally, the people that have done the most work in that way have come to the end. They're kind of bumping into the end going,
What's next?
what I found is that because people have come to the end of it, it's like many people don't want to take more courses.
I don't.
Yeah, they're just kind of over it. You're like, okay. And millions of people will continue to discover the excitement of all that, right? And should and need to be developed. But so many of us are at the end.
Yeah.
And this is actually what's next. So this discovery of when we come together with all of what we've developed in our individuality and the sensitivity and the depth and the vastness and the intensity that we can hold and all of the rest of the good stuff that we've done, then to come together and start to really pay attention to what can happen when we really find each other in that space. And instead of sharing egoic energy, we're sharing something deeper. And allowing that to show us what's next. That's the excitement. That's the next domain. And
So historically, let
Yeah.
me just trace this a little bit from what I see. First, we were non-egoic, we were tribal, we had no sense of individuality, we were a collective. There's some books about primitive consciousness saying that their head was the sky. So
Right.
there was no sense of self. And then through, let's say, religion and the sense of identification with me, and this is mine, and ownership and territory, the sense of ego, and this is all for me. And of course, that's the situation we are in now with properties and wars and power. So the sense of me, and then now we've reached the end of that, but we've needed to develop the healthy egoic sense in order for us to let go of this individual enlightenment to have something bigger. And is that kind of the track you're taking in historical development?
Well, historically, what I like to say, I don't quite trace as long a history, but if you think about the Age of Enlightenment as we emerge from the Middle, in the Middle Ages, and from way back, but people thought things like rocks fall because they get happier when they get closer to their mother.
That makes sense.
So they attributed animal-like qualities to inanimate things. In the Enlightenment, people said, no, let's not do that anymore. Now, but the worldview that we all absorbed in that time, which has given us incredible benefits. I don't want to go back to the Middle Ages, and neither does anybody else.
No, we need to build on that.
But the basic worldview is an infinite expanse of 3 dimensions of space populated by things. And people are some of the things in space.
Okay.
So I like to refer to it as things in space consciousness.
That's a very academic or intellectual way.
A very intellectual way to put it.
Okay.
But that is the fundamental metaphor through which we all perceive reality.
That we are things in space.
That we are things in space. And the way that you deal with things is you use force and manipulation to get them to where you want them to be.
Yeah, that's Newtonian, though.
Very Newtonian.
Okay.
That is the paradigm we're shifting out of.
Right.
That's the paradigm that's brought great advantages and also brought us to the brink of global destruction.
Exactly.
So what's next? And next is a recognition, the work that we're doing, you actually, and this is very difficult to get, but it really is, here's a way to describe it. We think of human beings as things that walk around, but really human being is a way of being that's shared amongst us.
Let me see if can you describe that in another way? Human beings are a way of being.
Human being, get the S off. So there's no more human beings, which would be separate.
Human being.
There's human being, which is a way of being. And as you focus more on that, you realize that that way of being starts to become more real than the individual manifestations. And you start to feel that you're existing within a context of being.
What's a characteristic of that beingness?
In the new paradigm.
In the new paradigm.
Well, in the new paradigm is you recognize that you are not just an individual agent, and you realize that there are limits to your individual agency. You realize that there are limits to your own, striving for your own personal achievement, and you start to long for something that can happen between us. You start to realize that when people come together, it's not just separate beings coming together with individual agendas interacting, that the 3 of us together have certain emergent possibilities that come into being. There's things that the 3 of us could uniquely do that only we 3 could do. And you start to develop the sensitivity to see what is that. And you want that to emerge more than the individual agendas.
Right. Would you say being, the beingness is being this or that, but the being inhabits all of us? Would that be a way of referencing
It's a way of saying it. There's the experiential, the way I experience it, and especially in working with a group of people, because it isn't just like a series of exercises or another workshop.
Right.
It's actually more accurate to say, like, the people that, the collective group of people that have entered into this have decided to live in a certain, it's sort of a we cloud. So we're together physically, but we're also always together, and we're discovering, how do you inhabit this new space, and how does it shape you and change you? So one of the ways I experience it personally is that my consciousness is way more fluid. It's more of a sense of intimacy, not only with my sense of self, but with everything.
Going back to the being, you are you're being. You're just being as not the individual, but as, or what Eckhart Tolle says, you're not living life, life is living you in that sense. Would that go along with it?
Yes, and the fact that it's not me becoming awakened by myself with existence, it's actually being developed mutually.
Oh, okay.
And I can't do it without you, and I can't do it without Jeff.
Or anyone else on the planet.
No, that's not true.
Okay, so where do you make the limit? Oh, in this space, it's us.
Mutuality means agreed that we've turned towards each other with the intent of having something happen. Someone on the street isn't intending that.
Okay, so in your groups, you make that intention.
Yeah.
We're taking each other along into the one space, the oneness of space.
Right, and then the development is, the influence together of, are you fully attending? Am I really here? Are we engaged? Is there a level of commitment? How do we activate this instead of just like, it's me feeling oneness with existence? There's no activation there.
Well, let me throw out one other element and see if it's included in what you're saying, is that the field effect, what Lynn McTaggart talks about, is that we are now, the three of us have created a field. In your groups, there's a field. That field is a unity that everyone's a part of and everyone's contributing, but it's an energetic thing. So do you get into the energetics of that particular aspect?
And one thing I'd love to add, because also I know that you and I share a certain appreciation of the artistic endeavor.
Yes.
That we did a weekend not that long ago about the way to look at this as a sort of spiritual artistry. That field that emerges is affecting. When a painter paints, they paint a painting, and as the painting forms, it also informs how they continue. There's a cycle, and the same thing happens with the field. There's a field, and you begin to see it, and as you see it, you begin to see its potentials. And that affects how you contribute to it. And the more.
Let me just absorb that for a second, because I think that's a really big point. So, say that again, because I'm trying to.
As you become sensitive to the field that starts to emerge between you, you contribute to it. And
I contribute to the field.
Right,
Okay.
and then things happen. The field expands its potential, and you see the expanded potential, and that new potential now informs how you can next contribute.
Oh, because I'm aware of the field,
right?
Then I actually make more of a conscious effort and connection to the field. Would you say it sort of takes you over, in a sense, the field?
I would say yes.
When you get lucky, yeah.
that would be the ideal.
And then we all become, it's like the end of that book, Arthur C. Clarke, Childhood's End, where they just become that field of energy, and they...
Not quite. But this is really fascinating because the way it works, the realization that has to happen for every individual is that they aren't just agentic beings that act in the world. Who they are is emerging in a context that's partly pulling them forward.
Right.
So if we change the field between us, I will literally emerge differently. More possibilities for me will exist in that new field. So just this historical piece, if you go back 100 years when psychology was just being developed by Freud, and this was like a whole new inner world. Every individual has this infinite inner world that we can explore. Now what we're realizing is that there's an inner world between us that's just as rich and just as much affects who we are as the individual inner world. So the next century will be about the collective inner space, the intersubjective inner space.
Right. Well, that's why I think family constellations work.
Absolutely.
You know about family constellations.
Totally, yeah.
There's a field effect that surrounds a family that influences
everyone.
The behavior, and until you work through the incompleteness, you're going to be affected by it. But in your work, you're creating a fresh field among the participants.
Right.
And we can get into a little bit actually how you work, because I think we've laid enough of a groundwork for people to get the sense of what you're trying to do and what you're talking about to go into it. Yeah.
One other piece that I just want to make, because people still think intersubjective means your subjective and my subjective. So and that's interpersonal. So, one of the things that we learned was, how do we share more of who we are? How do you really listen and have empathy for me, and vice versa, which is still separate. There's still separateness. So this particular consciousness is, how do we, and we've gotten very reliable as far as having the group field wake up inside of consciousness.
Yes.
So if you and I pop in together, and then we're inside of something and we're looking around going, yeah, I see that too. And our shared consciousness is the same consciousness.
Right. I have that experience when I look into people's eyes and suddenly we both disappear.
Go, boop.
Right. And there's you can see the spark.
Yeah.
The spark.
And then we're in.
Yeah. Then we're connected.
We're we've slipped through the wormhole.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's inside of that. One of the dimensions is, how do we work inside of that? What do we listen for? What's possible there? And what happens to us the longer we stay there?
Okay. What were you going to say about that, Jeff?
I don't think I had anything to say.
No, but I think what we're coming to is this new place that hasn't existed before, that is about what we said before, the we-ness, and there's a new understanding of this field effect. And then the big question that I'll come back to, keep coming back, is how do we get people to get that? I mean, we're talking, we're familiar. Right. When you do your groups, what happens? How do you start to generate that? Especially if they're coming, okay, me, teach me, that's me.
Well, that's one of the things that's different. So in presenting this to people like yourself, like us.
Or people who have no idea.
It isn't people with, here's the thing that I'm finding, is it is developmental. So it isn't like people that are just waking up to yoga might be good for me. Is not. They're not going to find. We're just going to sound like, wow, it'll sound interesting, but they'll be like, what were they talking about?
It doesn't make sense because they haven't developed through the egoic structures in order to let go of the egoic
and the excitement of all of that work of discovering oneself and realizing you're connected and all that stuff. But the people that have, they light up. I mean, they don't even totally understand it, but they're smelling something that's next. And there is a desire. The other part of what I find for people that have done a lot of the individual work is we have so much. At this point, we're willing to be open. We're willing to have our shadow. We're willing to be, to experience being, in our godlike selves. We have like the whole range. And then we're like, well, what do we do with it? Then people are trying to live their purpose.
And what do we do with it?
So what do we do with it is we get together. The first part is to get people to come together to say, okay, we can come together now and discover what kind of something greater wants us to do. Because it's yet again a surrender to be orchestrated.
And that's where we're at. Something greater is taking place. I mean, what's your experience of that?
Well, I mean, the metaphor that I like to use, because most of us, through our, however long it was, of individual work, had some fairly turbulent times. So to me, it's like we were all on ships in the ocean, some together, some alone, and we went through storms, and at some point you washed up on a beach, and you went, okay, who made it? Who else made it through the whole turbulence of individual growth? And now that we're here, what do we want to create together? How do we want to create a new way of being? Because that's what this has got to be about.
So then what takes place? So people come together in your sessions, and what do you do with them? And you just don't stare at each other. No, like I've been to one of your sessions, and you have something coming up, actually.
That's right.
When is that? October?
It's October 17, 18, 19.
And it's on your website?
Yes, that's in New York.
Evolutionary Collective.
Right, and there is also a group forming in San Francisco, so we have 2 coasts now. Right,
so what happens then? People come together, but how do we... Yeah, because we're all coming from the me space. Even as you come as teachers in the workshop, you're still, you had to eat breakfast and brush your teeth and all that.
Yes.
Right.
So then you just don't drop that. I mean,
No.
In fact, quite the opposite. We call this 3-day event that you're referring to as an orientation. So, and we say, well, during that orientation, it's a trip. We take a trip to this consciousness, and then when you're there, you can go, oh, this is what it is. And we have 7 what we call vectors that point to it. And the very first one is who's in the room matters. So not only do you not drop it, but the first thing you do is get to know who's there. And
who's there personally? Who are you? What do you bring to the table?
Right.
What's your history? What makes you unique, would you say?
What are you bringing to the party?
And everyone's bringing something.
Everybody's bringing a lot.
They are bringing a lot. So, all right.
And this, because one of the things people get sick of is they go to the next thing, and the next thing says, this is the thing, and everything you've done before now has to be dropped. Right. And people, well, I just spent 20 years doing all that. I don't want to drop it all, and there's got to be something of value.
Can I get my money back?
Really?
So instead you say, no, this is, Patricia talks about it in terms of DNA.
Do what, DNA?
In terms of DNA.
Oh, DNA.
Right? You have information that's deep inside your spiritual DNA, and then you're going to start to connect with other people who have their own DNA, their own developmental DNA, and that's going to create new possibilities. That will be some unpredictable conglomeration of the DNA in the room. Every orientation is different because there's different people in the room. And we we teach through emergence, which means you don't know who's going to be there till you get there.
Right.
You just know their names. And then you come and then you start to, and as people start to know one another, the field already starts to form.
So you don't have a preset, I mean, of course, you're not saying the field has to be like this. You are on the adventure as much as anyone.
Absolutely.
Who's part of
Right.
that.
And the design, when I designed this initially, one of the realizations that I had was everything that I'd ever experienced was based around either some charismatic teacher, often a man, this is an old model.
Or Amma.
Yeah, or
something.
every once in a while there's a woman, but there's usually some charismatic, awakened teacher, and then there's a teaching. Or there's some really interesting teaching, it's like the Enneagram or something, but everybody comes to dance around that maypole. And I thought, what about if the collective, if the emergence was central, and who's there is central? So that we're not committed to, we're not, going to keep the maypole in the middle, but that as we're discovering and as it's, kind of changing us, that we are discovering what's next and what we need next.
And it
then
honors
letting
the
go
ego
of things.
in a way, too. I mean, it honors the person.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so so everyone's recognized, and what's the next?
Well, let me just further
Yeah.
Go for
just
it.
say a little bit
Yeah.
more about the who's in the room.
Yeah.
So obviously, too, developmentally, who's in the room is also people that are ready for this.
Right, and that's a big part of who's in the room. It's like we're
Right,
all
that's-
at this stage together.
Yeah.
And of course, they say you teach what you need to learn, not that you know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
So
we're
you're
in it.
getting it. Yeah.
So we're the teachers,
Yeah.
but we're also in it.
Right.
There's a different model of, like I'm the teacher and I have everything to
Right.
disseminate, and you have no. So it's based on mutuality.
I like that.
And and mutuality is not the postmodern. Everyone has something to say. Everyone's going to process. Everyone's equal. I mean, obviously everyone's equal, but it's also we discern. We make sure it's clear that you're listening for where the real authority is in the moment.
In the moment.
Absolutely.
And it changes. This
Yeah.
person has the authority. It's actually the Vistar people do something like a Vistar
Yes.
communication where they focus on person, and they are speaking for the group in
Right.
that level
Yeah.
of Ron
Right.
Victoria
So there's
Friedman.
there's
Yeah.
some elements
Yeah,
of
yeah.
that, and also too, that people, not just who's in the room, the DNA part, which is fascinating because a lot of times you have people in a group that all have the same orientation. So if it's a Diamond Heart group or a, or Enlighten Next or Landmark or whatever it is, there's a certain speak, there's a certain.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a religion, but
It is.
not.
It is. They're all
Just-
part of the same beliefs.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Right.
And with this, you won't find, like if you talk to the people that are doing this, you're not going to find something you can grab. You'll find, because we have like a Catholic nun, we have people that have done 25 years of Diamond Heart, 25 years of this, 10 years of that. And their DNA, what's being shared is not their perspectives, because that's where you get into arguments. It's like a Democrat and a Republican.
Right. I'm right. And
Oh
you're
yeah,
right.
there's like all of that. It's that, and even with Jeff and I, we've had very different backgrounds, but there's a quality in the depth of connection where there really are like consciousness babies being born.
Right.
To the DNA. It's not something we're consciously trying to do, but you can actually feel that there's a consciousness that's born through this connection.
And I also get between you two that you have the shared collective mindset, if you want
An
to call it,
awakening, yeah.
that comes out in different ways through your different experiences and personalities.
Yeah.
But
Right.
you're talking about the same thing from your perspective. So
Right.
you're modeling that
Yeah.
here, and then you're also holding that space for the people in there. But of course, you're shifting and changing as everyone there
Yeah, it's
changes.
true.
So that I like that.
Yeah, so that's the first.
Right.
That's the first little.
That's the short version of the first vector.
That's
Well,
right.
and then
Well, I mean, there's a number, of course, but so one, you earlier mentioned the energetics of this,
Yeah.
and so one of the
Yeah.
things we speak about is what's the energy that we need to be upholding, and we use we talk about it in terms of courage. We're somewhat using the model that David Hawkins developed. You probably may be familiar.
Force versus power, but I don't exactly know what he...
So basically,
I interviewed him, but I didn't know what he was talking about.
Did you really?
No, I mean...
I could probably explain it more simply.
Yeah, please.
So basically, he draws this very interesting distinction, and you can find it in many places, but energetic levels below that are selfish.
Oh, right. He measures a certain level of
That's
energy.
right.
Which,
He
which I
happens to
thought was
measure.
particularly subjective, and he thought, oh, no, it's objective. Anyway, that was my problem with David.
And regardless of the methodology, we all know that there are energetic levels that are selfish, where we're basically defended and we're watching out for ourselves. And those go from very low levels of, extreme to... But the first level, the way he describes it, which I just think it's a very simple, beautiful definition that everybody gets, is courage. Courage is the first level. You might be afraid, you might not feel like you can do it, but you're going to do it anyway. You are actually contributing. And so one of the things we talk about is that in that group, everyone needs to be contributing. That's the only way it really works.
And that you're saying is courage. That's
courage.
helps raise
Courage
the
and
frequency.
above. That's the lowest level that we can deal with.
That's the minimal. And then, you can go up from courage to acceptance and enlightenment, et cetera, et cetera.
But is that the only way you talk about energetics? Because
No, that's only one.
Because I think there's a palpable, in the groups and the synergistic awarenesses, there's a palpable thing you sense and feel and merge with. I mean, it's a higher sense of feeling.
Right.
I think that's what I'm excited about, that we are actually activating a greater sense of our humanness, our ability to feel.
Yes.
These beyond the five senses, we're developing these other subtle senses that
cities.
Cities, but just they've always been there, but they haven't come online in a collective way that I think you're bringing out. So I'm very excited about that aspect. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, there's almost finished with a book that's about what are the activating principles, like what activates the space and what develops those capacities. And they're all within there. So there's a kind of, there's a way of turning towards truth and transparency and a way of being that is so intimate and so like hairline close. It's a sommelier quality.
But what activates
of being.
that?
Truth. The willingness to turn towards reality together.
Together, not my individual truth, like what happened to me, or what?
No,
explain that.
No, because that's postmodern. Postmodern is you have your truth.
So what is truth?
I have
then?
mine. Well, that's part of what that's a longer conversation. That's part of what the exercises develop, is that ability to go inside together. When we're inside together, looking around, it's not your truth and my truth. We actually can see things.
So what's like an exercise? I mean, you don't have to go through the whole course, but I would like to have a little piece.
There's so many, but
for truth, let's say, how would or the three of us, or four of us, or whatever's here.
Let me just underline something first, because it's really important. Because everybody, one of the things they discovered when they studied psychology was to see what works, what actually works, and they found out, and they did a whole thing, that in a therapeutic situation, 35% of it, I think it was who's there. So your capacity, your resources as a person, let's say you're in therapy with me, right? And that's 35%. Another 35% is your relationship with the therapist.
Right.
So there's 70%. 70% of it has nothing to do with what methodology, whether I'm a Jungian therapist, what kind of breathing things.
I do.
And I think it was 15% was placebo. And the last little bit was, what do we do? So one of the things that's hard for people to understand is that a lot of the design of this is in what's invisible. Who's there, how we're turned towards each other, what level of consciousness we've agreed to function in, and then you do the things that you do. But the other step is 95.
The exercise you're saying is
the
not
exercise
as
itself.
important as this, as a feeling. I think what you're talking about is a feeling that it's not that because I've had it, not that I'm dissolving, but that I'm unifying. Right. And you're a part of me, and I'm a part of you, and we're a part of something bigger, and that awareness that
right. But
happening.
One of the exercises, but I'm saying the construct, the conditions that are invisible but visible if you look. are what causes the field to activate. But one of the exercises,
Yes.
just to,
Yes.
because it sounds like you want to understand more the unity and the.
Something like that, yeah.
So one of the.
And to give people who are watching
yeah.
the experience.
One of the activating principles has to do with unity and uniqueness. Okay? Those two things together, because they have to both be there, right? And the uniqueness, we talk about like a tincture. There's like a point, origination point of being that everyone has. It's like a pinprick, and then the light comes through, and it comes through you very distinctly, and it comes through me very distinctly.
Right.
Yeah, and then it expresses itself into your life in a myriad of ways. But anybody who knows you and loves you, they know the Allenness, that's always been there.
But how does that contribute to the my-ness?
Well,
right?
the uniqueness, when we contact that in each other, absolutely enhances the unity.
Yeah, I get that.
And there are exercises you can do that where you can have a group of people completely focused on that particular origination essence in you, and that's pretty intense. Like to have, like 3 or 4 people completely focused on you, and then finding it, and then reflecting back exactly, moment to moment, how they experience it. It invites that part of you to get stronger and more visible.
Right. So what's been your experience of that, Jeff? In that
Of that particular
yes,
practice?
of that finding you and focusing on you and expanding you in terms of the collective.
Well, what of course, everyone goes through different, whatever they go through for it, right? So the intensity of connection, because we are so conditioned to separation, we really don't have any idea how much boundary we put between us and everyone else. So when you're in a situation where someone is really not putting up a boundary, then what of course is reflected to you is your boundaries, right? Because everyone else in the room they're not pushing you away, and yet so then you're like, wow, I'm really pushing all this away, and then it takes whatever it takes for you to realize and to relax the separation so that you can actually make contact.
Okay, so that's sort of like a second phase. So you go, you see who's there, and then you see where people's boundaries are. You see where they need to have a little more courage maybe to break through the letting go of what they want and what they've come forward to, or where their resistance is. Is that what you're saying?
And also we exist in relationship.
Right.
We are in constant relationship. Even if you're alone, you're still in relationship. There's no alone in a human being. And what people find in this, because we're working directly on the field of relatedness. So what people see, so this is a takeaway. It's not really what the work is about, but it is what people often see. How they are in relationship in that circumstance is just a highlighted version of how they always are. And so what people walk away with is, oh my God, I push everybody away, or I manipulate everybody in this way, or I do this, or I do that.
But doesn't that get back to sort of the psychological me part?
It does. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with those kinds of insights. But as I said, it's not what the work is about. The work is about what happens once you learn to stop doing that.
I see. Okay, we're going to pick some of this up on the next show because we've covered so much amazing information. I think I'm digesting it, I'm integrating it. I've been talking to Jeff Carreira and Patricia Albere about collective awakening, and it's a whole new phenomenon in consciousness. I recommend it. Your website?
Evolutionarycollective.com.
Evolutionarycollective.com. Thanks. This is Alan Steinfeld for New Realities, and you can reach me at newrealities.com.